Well, if you have that secret sauce recipe, you give it to me because I'd love to be able to have that type of recipe. Most folks are not necessarily all in on value-based care, so being able to show them theoretical value, at least in my experience, isn't going to be something that's going to move the needle and help you sell. Getting the conversation started sometimes can be a forbidden fruit because once you get a taste of it, you really are enjoying.
If you don't know what works, don't automate it. See what works first, and then maybe we can automate it down the line.
So sometimes having some of the AI can do more harm than good because you're automating something that isn't going to resonate, right?
Hi, I'm Dr. Umer Khan, a physician and a two-times health tech founder, and welcome to Khanversations. And we look to have conversations on achieving success in tech, AI, digital health, and for startups. Our special guest, Josh Pappas, is a seasoned health tech sales executive, and he will be sharing insights from the front lines. We're set to unravel the secrets behind the booming digital health market, projected to reach an astonishing $500 billion by 2025. Josh Pappas, how are you doing today?
Welcome. Thank you for having me on the pod and for that amazing intro. Really excited. Been following you along on LinkedIn. So really great to connect and excited to dive in on these topics.
Exactly. I have been following you and following the exciting work that you have been doing, not just right now, but also in the past. And I think you have you are in a unique position right now because, we tend to develop products. I've been developing health tech products and digital health, and now it's AI. But the main focus, we tend to forget sometimes, people who are in the tech space largely, how to get the product out there, how to market it, how to get sales, how to get that funding that you need to take your business to the next level. And I think that's where you fit in. And you've been a forefront in this. Can you share some unique insights or behind the scenes look on some of these strategies just to get the ball rolling on this topic? What is the secret sauce that you have come to realize?
Yeah, well, if you have that secret sauce recipe, you give it to me because I'd love to be able to have that type of recipe. No, I always say I kind of backed in my way into this whole venture capital, digital health, before it was cool type environment by quite honestly just starting my career in pharma. It was a foot in the door right out of school, but kind of really got a great foundation on selling into provider practices, understanding how a doctor's office works. And that really led me to basically meeting some folks on the venture capital founders. And I had these relationships with physicians. And quite honestly, I was too naive and too young to know, but basically played matchmaker. And that was kind of the foundation of my digital health sales, right? Where basically I was solving problems for providers in rural Carolinas and Georgia and the Southeast and kind of connecting them with, at that point, as you can imagine, these founders in Silicon Valley, Seattle, and different areas. And basically solving challenges, right? And solving pain points using technology, very basic technologies at that point around chronic care, remote monitoring. And that was my forte into this digital health sales. But since then, it's been fascinating. I've kind of ridden a wave of, as I'm sure you've seen, the intersection between this technology with COVID-19 and other different areas on truly accelerating and probably for the best of being able to technology be enabler for lots of different areas around healthcare, right? So super fortunate, right place, right time, right connections, but have kind of parlayed that into working with very interesting founders, companies, different subsets, remote monitoring, hospital at home, now mental health. And so I'm definitely passionate about working with founders like yourself and others that have a great idea, probably have a lot of technology, and then kind of figuring out, okay, who do we need to talk with? How do we get this in the hands of patients, clinicians, and go from one to scaling that. So I've been super fortunate.
No, definitely, absolutely. So from the sales perspective and from the VC funding perspective, let's just step back for a little bit. What are venture capitalists looking for in digital health startups when they're looking to fund a company? I know you've been through a bit of this, and I believe the companies that you have been with, you have raised around $500 million in VC funds. So maybe you can share some insights on what do VCs look at for all the digital health entrepreneurs and founders out there?
Yeah, well, I'll add the caveat, right? I've been super fortunate to work with lots of founders, lots of founding teams, and they've done the bulk of some of the fundraising. But I think where my unique perspective is being able to arm them with the customers, the plan, the execution, the hiring, and being able to take that and kind of enhance their vision of taking the technology to be able to scale it, right? Because ultimately, a lot of the VCs are trying to, make the bet on the founder of the company, the sales organization that's going to scale and deliver returns, right? At the end of the day, but particularly in healthcare, sometimes I think where that line gets a little bit different than maybe some other industries is you have patients involved, you have large organizations that don't have technology at the forefront up until recently, and so it's unique from a sales perspective because I'll never forget, super fortunate in my days at a seed to Series A startup at Optimize Health, where I was working with the founding team, great leadership, and that's probably the closest thing to a bunch of guys and gals in a garage, type startup. But basically, we were by day doing our selling into provider practices, figuring out, doing a little bit of product, a little bit of marketing, a little bit all of the above on the sales perspective. And then by night, doing some of the similar things, but kind of, also being able to make sure our reporting and our analytics matched up to tell a really story to make us investable, right? And so sometimes those things are linear, but then there's also some different areas that you have to show investors that this is more than just making money, right? And this is more than just a 10x return. Here's how we're going to do it now, and with the money, here's how we're going to do it cross functionally. And so I've always enjoyed the collaboration with the founding teams, but then hopefully being able to, once we get some of those funds, really building the foundation for once we get this money, we can really scalable and scale some of this. And in healthcare, it sometimes can be hard, right? That term scale and that term of being able to get it there can sometimes move a little bit slower, but it has some of the same foundations.
Exactly. So you mentioned some of the issues that you have, of course, when you're the startup, but you need to get your foot in the door. And with digital health, with something new coming in, clinicians and me being one, I realize that we may not be that approachable. We may be involved in our day-to-day, work. We have patients to see. We have a whole list of patients to see, and people are possibly coming in all day long. How do you get that initial foot in the door for a health tech startup who wants to just, let's say, for example, it's a remote patient monitoring, and you want to convince a practice that, hey, this is going to be useful for you? How do you get that first customer? How do you get your foot in the door? But let's talk about, a clinic or
Mhm.
instead of an enterprise or a hospital currently. How would you go about going into getting your first client?
Yeah, it's a great point because I think as a startup, you shot it. I really do think you need to choose one of those, and I do think at a clinic level, it's a great place to start. I think there's two main areas, right? Number one, anytime I've joined a new role, and it seems somewhat cliche, but it's been super helpful, is go on a listening tour, and then more than just a listening tour, leverage your network, relationships, founder, investors, whoever, to just try to have as many conversations in the first 60 days with, in this case, if you're trying to get into a clinic, with folks that are associated with clinics, associated if you're trying to sell into remote monitoring, primary care, cardiology, even if it's an RN, a nurse, somebody who works in the back office, office manager, really chat with them and see what resonates, see what their day to day, how you kind of can come across and help challenge, some or help some of their challenges. It seems, and do that with in a way that doesn't have like an agenda of trying to sell them something, and it's going to sometimes feel a little bit awkward because you're going to want to jump in there and say we can solve this, we can solve that, but just listening for a little bit I think will really help to when you're able to again, kind of a combination of whether it's email, outbound, maybe you have inbound, or maybe geographically, right? You're in the North Carolina or you're in the Pennsylvania area. Go to someplace local and really say, hey, we think we have something that could help you, physician, you, the community. At a clinic level, that's really powerful. And setting up a couple of those conversations. And if you really have, in this case, with remote monitoring, something that could help the patient, but also help the clinic financially, in the clinic level and everything from a fee for service perspective, being able to outline that will at least be able to hopefully get that first conversation and get that first pilot.
Yeah, so I think what you're talking about, the model, you need to be very, very clear on the model and what the physician or the clinic and the practice will be gaining, including, of course, better care for the patient, their patients. But of course, you need to be on point, and it should flow through your tongue. The real value that you're providing, maybe the cost savings or the additional revenue coming in, you really have to be on point. And is that something you emphasize?
Yeah, you have to emphasize it, and to even take a step further, if you're going into a clinic level, right? They're doing in this case primary care, internal medicine. They're quite literally running an entire business operation, seeing patients with not that much staff, right? And they're seeing 40, 50 patients a day. They don't really have time to do their main job. So if you're going to come in and add something there, it's not going to be resonated. So I'd even go further and say, obviously the ROI, how it's going to help clinically, but also too, can this realistically, who's going to do this in the office? Are they going to have the time to do that? Is my solution going to be able to have something that connects to their infrastructure, right? These seem like, and the reason why I harp on this is, and I also, it's maybe not as realistic now in a post-COVID world, but I was super fortunate that I started my medical sales career seeing how a doctor's office runs from the beginning of the morning, from the front desk all the way through lunch, and talking with those folks. And sometimes I think it's a good, it's a good audit, because what you're going to realize is that your technology or solution just isn't going to work in a clinic, right? And maybe it can work. There's a lot of virtual care, but I think that's the big key. And a lot of times it has to do with workflow. Who's going to do this? Are they going to be able to do this very easily into what already exists within the workflow of
Does
the
it
clinic?
fit? Yeah, does it fit seamlessly into their workflow? And if it's going to add, it has to provide real value if it's going to take them 5 extra minutes per patient, perhaps. So it has to be really, really, really go fit into their scheme of things.
Yeah, it really does, right? Or if it's worthwhile enough, who's going to be doing that, and how do I kind of, because the one great thing about these clinics is both from a clinicians, or as you probably know, there's these rock star RN and MA folks that, if you can truly have a conversation with them, solve some of their problems, maybe you're actually solving some of their workflow challenges, making their life easier, even though it's going to add time in the short term. Maybe it helps them on the back end, but being able to have some of those kind of concrete conversations is going to, let's just say I sell the doctor on this, sell the office manager. Let's just say they sign X contract. The real people that are going to typically, in a lot of different solutions that I've been a part of, the people that are going to run it are going to be those MAs, those RNs, those kind of, rock star back office folks are going to be the ones that are going to make the program sink or swim. So again, it's further, you got to kind of convince the people that make some of those practice level decisions that it makes sense. So that's number one. But always you want to stay close to those folks who are doing this and be able to really outline, like, how is this going to make my life easier? Get them to visualize with this tool or technology, your life's going to be easier. The practice is going to be making more money, and the patient is going to be more satisfied. If you can check those three boxes, you're going to get at least a chance, pilot or whatever you want to call it, to have your technology. And then as I'm sure you've seen, and it's jumping ahead a little bit, but once you're able to do that, the cool thing about clinics and geographies is that, particularly in like primary care, internal medicine, it's not really a competitive market. So if I do something in Charlotte, North Carolina, or in Pittsburgh, chances are, if it works, you can kind of really expand like rapid fire, because of word of mouth with physicians, because you're all kind of helping the community. And so I've seen, I've been in North Carolina and seen, rural Georgia, 10 clinics in Macon, Georgia overnight be able to adopt the technology, right? And then you can kind of, from a startup perspective, really narrow down and focus on a geographical area versus trying to acquire a bunch of customers just based on referral and word of mouth, which is pretty powerful.
No, exactly. And if you are a startup and you have a basic product, let's say for an internal medicine practice or a cardiology practice, perhaps, right? We're just talking about clinics right now, and we'll touch upon healthcare systems in a bit. But I think if you have an idea or a startup or a product in mind, involve somebody from with a clinical perspective, or possibly pilot look to pilot at a certain clinic, or maybe even partner with a clinic. Perhaps that may be you need to do a little bit of legwork to get somebody on board if possible. But I think that may be a scenario where startups could look to get the real stakeholders involved from the initiations of your development process, from the beginning, and just to see where you are actually going to be providing value. How about this as an approach?
I think it works really well, right? And there's no, I think the biggest challenge that I see is you have to imagine, if you're, particularly if you're coming from this, let's just say in a more technical or traditional software SaaS founder or even sales team, and trying to enter into healthcare, a lot of the playbook around cold outreach and prospecting, it doesn't necessarily work as much from a clinic perspective. There's obviously some sales techniques that do work. I've built BDR teams, business development rep, kind of cold outreach teams within that. But just know that sometimes the traditional SaaS playbook of calling up doctors, like they're busy. They can't even join a Zoom because they're seeing patients. And so you really have to leverage some of the relationships. So if you have some of those relationships, obviously you have to build them. But there's also a powerful way, to your point, of being able to, there's sometimes organizations or folks that have deep relationships with these clinicians. They really trust these clinicians. Maybe they've sold different products across the years and trusted advisors of these clinicians, and so that becomes powerful. So there are some ways where you can chat with some of those folks, or try to leverage them virtually and build some of those relationships. Maybe you can't do it with the clinician because he or she is seeing patients and getting clinics, but there's also, I would say, be creative and maybe go to some of these places in person, chat with some of those folks, or see what type of connective tree that you have. To all it takes is, in my opinion, in the clinic space, is if you can prove it in kind of 1 to 5 different organizations, then that's a really great proof point that you can kind of really start to say, hey, we can help this population, we can help this size practice, right? At Optimize, what we did was we kind of really focused on blocking out the noise, and we really started to do well once the team and I focused on under 50 doctor practices, right? We had a great tool for that. We knew our limitations. That's the other key, is like sometimes you can go in and just like want to chase anything and everything, right? And sometimes it's like, well, let's just say the Mayo Clinic said yes tomorrow. How is our one developer and the team going to even service these patients, right? So some of it is just kind of chasing some of those, versus saying, hey, you know what, we have something really great for under 20 doctor practices. Let's really focus and target, and we have a message and we have proof points of saying, we can't help you on everything, but what we can do is X and Y, and here are some of the folks that we've done it through. And that becomes really powerful for 2 reasons, right? Number one, for the customer, because it's like, that's us. That resonates with us. But then for your team, you're also able to, from a startup perspective, really execute on what you can do, which is usually great before you start, stretching your team too thin.
Right, exactly. And I think you basically had a little bit of your sales pitch right there when you walk into a practice that you don't, I mean, you may be in touch with them before, but let's say you blindly walk into a practice and you talk to them, hey, I'm part of this startup, and I believe that we have this solution for this particular problem, and we have an end-to-end solution, a seamless integration with clinics such as yours. And I believe that based on this and numbers such as this, we envision that a practice could be bringing in this amount of income, all in agreement with regulations, HIPAA compliance, and all these laws. And I think if you give me 5 minutes, or if I can talk to the doc for 5 minutes, I think I can get an additional revenue source in for you, as well as at the same time helping out your patients. So you need to have a sales pitch ready to talk about and prepared. Excellent. Now, so this was for clinics, right? How about for enterprise level solutions, large health systems, and payers? There has to be a different approach. I think I'm going to talk about that. However, I want to talk. I want to step one step back. I want to take one step back. And what is a sort of a cycle for a clinic or a small clinic or a group of clinics, how long does it take? What is your approximate timeline for this? And then we'll go into larger healthcare models, healthcare systems.
Yeah, as you can imagine, it really can vary, but typically, right, you would say they would be able to make a decision at a clinic level, a buying decision, let's just say, in 30 to 90 days, right? Meaning when I had that initial conversation, that's one of the advantages. And sometimes too, they're maybe not purchasing something, maybe in remote monitoring's case, they're signing the contract, but nothing gets invoiced or revenued until there's utilization, right? But still, usually it's a 30 to 90 day time horizon. In fact, normally the most reasons why a decision didn't happen actually was not they chose competitor X, Y, and Z. It was because they made no decision, right? So that's one of the key areas. Is sometimes it's just the status quo, not making a decision, not doing anything different is typically going to be what that quote unquote decision is. But being able to get to know quickly sometimes really helps. That 30 to 90 day, typically these types of dollar amounts in terms of what they're purchasing, right, could again be something where they're not necessarily committing much upfront money, because that's the other key is that if you have a solution that cost $100,000 to get started, and then maybe they could make, let's just say, $1 million. Well, that sounds great, but no physician practice that you have is going to cut you, unless you let me know, $100,000 check typically, right? So normally these are going to be getting in, showing the value, but once you're in, then becomes the second version of that, where it's a little bit of hand holding on the implementation and making sure there's throughput and utilization, because probably most technologies you have to go from patient one to patient X, and so within that, usually the nice part about it is there's typically the physician or owner or the office manager. There's a very clear path to who can sign that contract and make that decision. As you start to get up in the clinic space, again, we saw be very very beneficial. I mean, you can get organizations that have deal sizes once they're on there, 10,000, 20,000, I'm talking about kind of yearly, all the way up to, hundreds of $1,000s. And you can build a really great, scalable business, and, with these types of organizations. Right. But that's normally the key from a physician practice perspective. Things are transitioning a little bit more to value-based care, but it's really, and this isn't going to be bad, but a lot of the buying is transactional, because a lot of these organizations are fee for service. That's not to mean that these clinicians aren't going to do what's best for the patient. You have to show clinical outcomes, economic outcomes, but if you're kind of going in there, I would say with kind of soft return on investment numbers, your chances of getting adoption quickly are going to be lower, versus being able to speak to the clinical efficiencies, the workflow efficiencies, and then ultimately the economic efficiencies, because that's kind of the world that they're in, right? Most folks are not necessarily all in on value-based care, so being able to show them theoretical value, at least in my experience, current state, isn't going to be something that's going to move the needle and help you sell.
Yeah, definitely. So startup founders, so you can picture a 30 to a 90-day scenario, and when you're looking at your your bottom line and future. So now switching over to larger corporations, healthcare systems, payers, perhaps enterprise level complexities. So can you walk me through the steps involved with larger health systems, perhaps enterprise level solutions, for a startup or a smaller health tech business?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's almost to your point. It's night and day, right? And I do think that it's night and day in both in product and design and industry, but a lot of this has to do with, again, going back to my earlier point, founders, it's never bad to work with big systems and organizations, but there's so much that needs to be thought about before even hiring a salesperson or trying to have those conversations. Things around, are you SOC 2 compliant? Do you have these types of security components built? Is your product scalable, right? If you're selling an API solution, if you're selling an app, what's going to happen if they did turn this on and you went from 0 to 10,000, right? And so these are some of the problems that you almost have to have solved before you're going to even want to get into the ring, because otherwise you'll continue to have all of these long conversations, and it's going to go nowhere. Or worse, you might actually go somewhere and then can't deliver, right? And so one of the most powerful things is that, uh, in my opinion, right, organizations, health tech founders obviously want to work with big organizations. It looks great on the slide, looks great on a logo. But what sometimes they don't think about is that it's a smaller world working with health systems and payers, because there's only so many, and especially with the consolidation, as we chatted about, there's only so many health systems and payers out there, right? If you make some mistakes, let's just say in product and you're learning, that's great to do in the physician practice. And guess what? If you're in rural North Carolina and something doesn't work out well, you obviously can fix the product and do some different areas, but nobody's going to remember that, right? Now, if you somehow get an at-bat or opportunity with a big health system, that's great. But sometimes if you make some mistakes there, if the product doesn't work, then the word travels much faster there. And that's not to scare any founders out there, but I think it's important consideration, right? You have to have security, so you have to kind of have your house in order in terms of the technical and security component. From a sales cycle perspective, the initial conversations are getting, particularly in the health system side, right, focusing there, it's getting harder and harder. I would say coming out of COVID, there were some technologies, but now with the state of the finances, anything that's not a have to have, and when I mean have to have, like, is critical to an infrastructure of a health system. The budgets, the departments, the organizations, I don't see folks buying and purchasing a lot, right? And so again, that's not to say it's always going to be this way, but it's definitely even harder now. And so I think being able to focus on, again, if your organizations, if you have any connective tissue to that, warm intros are great to get the conversation started. I would say getting the conversation started sometimes can be can be the forbidden fruit, because once you get a taste of it, you really are enjoying, and you say, hey, we just talked with Northwell, we just talked with NYU. But if you don't have a very succinct way of qualifying that, and again, getting to know is the most powerful thing you could do in the enterprise sale, especially early on. And what I mean by that is being able to understand, is this a realistic partner? How do I do things in the form of, once I do have the conversation, can I have some of these honest conversations and saying, do you guys even have a need for this within 6 to 12 months? And then, B, there are some creative ways that I've been a part of, where sometimes if you really want to get a marquee partner, what you need to do is you need to be willing to get creative on how you partner. Maybe you partner with their innovation. Maybe you give up some equity to kind of be more design partners, and you do some different areas to incentivize this type of system to give you a platform and an avenue to partner, pilot, whatever you want to call it, right? And if you're not willing to do that, then sometimes it's going to be an uphill battle.
Yeah, especially if you have a product, you may have had a pilot here and there, and unless you have proven results, then it may be a bit more difficult. And when you want to get your foot in the door, then you probably have to partner. You need to have flexibility, probably tag along a physician, a champion, who may root for you and who may say, yeah, this is what I need, and we need to see how we can get this through the door, and we need to see how we can implement this. And I believe when I was looking to set up COVID-19 monitoring units, I found a physician champion, and he was the head of the medical internal medicine department, and the internal medicine people were really really strongly hit by COVID-19, and so that really helped out. And I think you're on point that for like larger health systems and enterprise level solutions, you really have to be on the money. You have to look at the regulatory standpoints, the HIPAA compliance laws, integrations, interoperability issues need to be at the forefront, and these need to be hammered out before you actually talk to people. So you have funding, you are at the stage, you have a solution that can really help out. Yeah, definitely you need to have all of these in the bag, and really on the ball. One aspect regarding sales is And you mentioned previously about email marketing or cold calls. How about just walking into a hospital and say, hey, I have the solution, and I want to talk to somebody about this. Have you done this, or what do you think about something like this?
Yeah, well, I think what's changed across the board is there used to be lots of techniques that folks could use and leverage, particularly in digital health, around sequences, which is kind of a series of emails, outreach. And what's happened is that whether it's the advent of ChatGPT, the influx of startups, if you chat with any decision maker on the enterprise level, just in general, I mean, it's almost noise at this point, right? It didn't always be this way. And I'm talking about circa like 2-3 years ago, where you could make an impact, you could book some meetings, you could really differentiate yourself on kind of personalized outreach. And some of those principles still can apply, right? You can get some of those meetings, and you should definitely be trying, I would say, much more a targeted approach, saying, having a thesis of, I researched you, I want to partner with you, I can partner with you because our solution can do X, Y, and Z that's specific to you. You had in your area here that said mental health matters. It's an initiative in 2024. I think we can do that. Can we chat? So all that might work, but the problem is that automation has made it so that chances are, even if you do a good email, delete, delete, delete. So to your point, I think 2024 is going to accelerate the need to maybe it's harder to show up to your local hospital and knock on the door, right, with COVID-19 protocols and this or that. But there's versions of that, right, where it's having a brand and connecting with some of these folks on things like LinkedIn, showing up. I'm always a big proponent of, I don't care where you live, try to figure out, are there organizations, associations where folks meet, or happy hour? There's things like HIMSS, there's the Healthcare Executive Association, there's doctor groups that at a local, national, regional level have these meetings. You can get involved in there, at least get kind of conversations with some of those folks that you mentioned. You really have to do a little bit. There's no magic formula. You kind of have to do a little bit of both. And I do actually think the companies and the organizations are going to differentiate themselves on some of those creative ways to get out of the digital side, to be able to engage and again, understand, though, this is to start the conversation, or maybe this is also just to have a thesis of how these organizations are thinking about this, right? And so maybe that conversation isn't just, hey, let me send you this, sales presentation. Like, I would love to spend 15-20 minutes with you talking about your challenges, problems, and maybe it doesn't work out for that particular executive, but you use that intel from that executive to go and market to that. So I think the couple big takeaways there are, you still have to continue some of the automated and kind of digital outreach, because that's never going away, but being able to show up in person is going to be critically important, particularly at an early stage. So doing that at a local level, and that doesn't necessarily mean you have to show up at these mega conferences, right? I actually think the opposite is that particularly if you're early stage, if you can focus on geography that you live in, and start to get some groundswell there. Typically if you go to these organizations or these meetups and you attend, let's just say you're trying to sell into the chief medical officer at local hospital, you really have a good solution. Well, if you go there, if you kind of have conversations, you chat with folks, you follow up with them, not one person says, you know what, this is a pretty good idea. Don't necessarily get discouraged, but I think sometimes too, being able to chat with some of those folks is going to be a good barometer versus wasting time to do all this outreach and get to this conversation. So I'm really bullish on being able to get back and connect in person and being creative on doing some of that.
No, precisely. I think in healthcare, I think it's a lot more personal in a way. But from the digital space perspective, how about regular Facebook ads or Google ads or YouTube ads, and building a funnel and getting people to get an appointment, and you have somebody on the other line and scheduling appointments? Is this part of your playbook?
Yeah, I think I've seen the playbook. I was fascinated with really brilliant founders and marketers and organizations that I've worked with that were able to, with very kind of targeted outreach, be able to generate if you type in remote monitoring, if you type in patient engagement, being top of mind on SEO is a great additive, particularly if you're early on, right? Because typically nobody knows that you exist. But particularly in certain other areas, you also have to remember, when I was doing remote monitoring, nobody really knew what remote patient monitoring was, RPM was, which seems crazy to think about now, but a lot of it had to do, and same way with hospital at home, where you can kind of also, if you're at the cutting edge, as folks are searching more general, you want to be top of mind, and then maybe you're fielding some conversations that are more awareness focused, teaching them about the remote monitoring codes, teaching them about what hospital at home is. So to me, in those certain kind of niche areas, where it's a new kind of concept or new technology within healthcare, to me, SEO is really powerful then, because they're searching on their own, let's just say on the topic, or it is, something new that physicians, practices, administrators are doing that. I think it becomes really powerful. It becomes challenging if it's a very saturated market. You can kind of really spin your wheels and become really expensive to try to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak. If you type in patient engagement, or patient scheduling, there's a million people that do that. Not to mention, if you're selling into enterprises, Epic can probably do it, and they'll tell you, anybody you talk to will say they can do it for quote unquote free, right? And so I think some of it has to do with, I've seen the power of it, but it has to do with what stage you're at. Understand that a lot of times, if you're talking about anything digital, it's very expensive. I'm also a big proponent of, sometimes it works for this organization and company, it doesn't work there. I will, be a little bit more heavy-handed. Stay away in healthcare early stage for kind of outsourcing your cold call or your business development, SDR, sales development rep. I have seen this time and time again with multiple organizations, kind of approach of, it seems great on paper, right? Where you can kind of have some outreach and targets, and not necessarily want to bring in full-time folks to kind of outsource that, of saying, hey, we'll get you as many meetings as possible with physician practices, with health systems, and all that looks great on a spreadsheet. And it probably actually does. I've chatted with folks in other industries, and in law tech or something that's traditional B2B, sometimes that works, right? Because you have a product that solves a solution, and then it's a little bit of just a game of getting as many of those at bats as possible. What I've found, and I don't recommend to any founder right now, maybe save you 20, 30. I've seen it get the bill get pretty expensive. Don't do that in healthcare, because that type of outsource, there's just such, as a learning curve around healthcare. It doesn't really make sense to anyone, but particularly to people that don't understand healthcare. And so, that's one of the areas where it seems great on paper. I'm sure a founder can show some of that, but the learning curve in healthcare sometimes is really difficult to be able to do some of these outsourced, types of outreach and increased throughput. And I've seen the horror stories of that. So I'm a big proponent on not doing that, and not necessarily because these aren't good companies that can do it in other industries, just because healthcare is so hard. There's a learning curve, and nobody has time. If you're really going to try to do that and create a scalable process, also when you think about investors too, that's not scalable, right? That might work. But I'm a big proponent of, even if one or two folks, if you can understand, hey, we can really sell to this market, this segment, then take the time, the money, energy, and training of training some of those folks, understanding your solution, understanding the market, the language around who you're selling to, and all of that's going to pay dividends versus some of the quote unquote easy wins that maybe folks are looking for.
And maybe get the first few clients yourself as a founder, or the core team of the startup. Try to get the first few clients yourself. Be the lead, be the brand, the brand for the brand, the spokesperson for your own brand, in a way. And instead of outsourcing too much, when you need to scale, when you need to spread your ideas far and wide, and your product is starting to work properly, then maybe you can have a huger or a much bigger sales team, try to go out for more business.
Yeah, well, and I think to piggyback on that, right? And there's no right or wrong way to do it, right? Because I'm sure anytime, other than the outsource SDRs, I'll die on that. But other than that, I think particularly in a certain stage, I do find working with some founders and organizations, there's sometimes an overemphasis on trying to hire for where the company wants to be than where they are right now. And an example of that is I'm also I've seen the success of being able to have kind of a little bit more of like a full scale account executive. They're kind of, okay with doing the dirty work of what a cold call executive would do, but they're also competent enough to be able to take maybe a founder, close 3 or 4 deals. They're able to take some of that framework to close deals themselves, but they can kind of source deals themselves. Those are all really powerful of being able to do that, particularly super early stage. What I see some founders try to do is be able to hire that sales leader that maybe has worked and done some of that in their expensive resource, but it's also just not a good way to sometimes match it up there, right? Because sales leaders that have all this experience, they want to kind of take a process and really optimize it and scale it. And what you're trying to do as a founder is say, I think I have a thesis on this process. I think we've closed this. And so you kind of want somebody who's hungry, so he or she that can be okay with doing some of the dirty work on the front end of getting, and trying and doing different discovery around acquiring the client, getting in the funnel, but then also can take that conversation to a contract signature. And then sometimes can actually do a little bit of the hand holding on, taking that from 1 patient to 500, right? And so that's a framework, and sometimes it's there, but I have seen founders be trying to hire for that sales leader too early, and it's a disservice usually to the founder, and then also to the sales leader, right? Because sometimes they're sold a different bill of goods than what they signed up for, and what happens is that there's a little bit of the blame game, right? Versus being able to hire those and scale some of those less expensive resources again to hopefully create. The main goal is that once you're hiring that VP of sales level or different areas, is that you have some form of a process, and you might have actual reps that somebody needs to optimize and lead.
No, right. So we talked about B2B, clinics and healthcare systems. Have you had experience with digital health companies or startups in the B2C space, direct to customer? What would be a change or a difference in approach for a B2C digital health startup possibly?
Yeah, admittedly, I've spent most of my career on the B2B side. But the kind of the D2C really fascinates me. And I've chatted with, worked with some different mentors. I think that playbook is completely different. And in terms of actually being able to me, it's much more powerful around the SEO, around acquiring almost the patient. And then sometimes too, I do think that chatting with some of those folks, everybody wants to be ushered, whether it's investors or this or that, into telling your startup to say, hey, you need to sell to health systems and hospitals. But I've also chatted with founders, and I think depending on your solution, it's never bad to say, hey, we're having patients utilize this. Patient utilization is key metric no matter what. So sometimes I do find founders get discouraged when they maybe go and try to go the VC route or do that. They get discouraged when I chat with them and I'm saying, why don't you just go direct to consumer, maybe in parallel pass, and get this into the hands of folks, get some feedback, because this is a great solution where a doctor might not use this for their diabetes patients, but if you can get a groundswell, and I think particularly I've seen some success around maternal health, for example, right, where founders have started with building a really great product that multiple folks use, and then there's kind of moms that will swear by this product, right? And now it's much easier sometimes to understand your value, your utilization, to enter into B2B. But that playbook is going to look a lot different, right? I have less experience with it, but I think my message to founders is don't necessarily discourage it because a VC fund told you that you're never going to do that because you should only go to B2B. Because it's also not a fun purgatory to spend 3 years just banging your head and not getting one health system, right? So I think that there's ways that you can do a little bit of both. I do think it's going to be fascinating to see as more of these virtual clinics pop up, as telehealth has expanded. I do think that there's been an opening of opportunity where companies don't necessarily have to choose one or the other, and they can really be successful doing both. So more to come there, but I'm super fascinated about it because I love that type of. It mirrors much more of a a type of business model that kind of could be a little bit more replicated from things like e-commerce or other areas.
Right. No, definitely. So, changing gears a little bit. Um, so, your field of a marketing specialist or a sales specialist. So, a lot of health tech founders, they're looking to hire people such as yourself. And with your experience and with your success that you've had, what pointers do you want to give health tech founders and startup leaders, or even established businesses going into health tech, about what should they look for in a sales executive? What should be the criteria? What should be the expertise that they should be asking? That, hey, this is the person I want, or these are people I want to select.
Yeah, it's a great topic, right? And I have, again, my own personal experience and thoughts on it, right? I think number one, and again, this is just my personal opinion, but I do think that there's a little bit of a misalignment sometimes. It's not all the time, right? But I do think that sometimes, founders, companies as well, probably on the other side, there's a little bit of we want to get the best founders, we want to find the best talent, but sometimes I think that there's a breakdown in really kind of, particularly at early stage, understanding the good things about what you've built, the limitations about what you've built, and then in the kind of the process. If you think about it, all of these organizations, companies are trying to save money here, save money there. But I think that some of what I've experienced is that sometimes the matchmaking, it's always hard to hire good talent to do some of that vetting. But I think some of it has to do with I took a course with a guy. He's a great thought leader in it. He was at early stage of Patient Pop. His name's Kevin Dorsey. And one of the best takeaways I have from taking some of his courses is, is sometimes companies, they think that they're doing this and hiring and they're trying to make their company look good, which is great. But sometimes just being that radical transparency, and especially when it comes to sales and early stages, saying, hey, here's the good, here's maybe the not so good, and then here's kind of what the first 30, 60, 90, and here's some of the upsides, but really kind of coming in with that type of transparency versus, hey, here's our fairy tale version of our startup. Here's the maybe one logo we have, even though we have 0 patients on there. And the reason why I get to that is I think that sometimes I've seen big success with, if the candidate knows kind of what to expect coming in, and then the same way there, the startup kind of knows some of those fits. And if both parties say yes, after that, it's going to be a heck of a lot better of an experience, in my opinion, than if they've been sold one version of the company and then they're trying to sell one version of there's sometimes a mismatch of expectations. And
So
to
basically,
try to,
yeah, so basically, the founder, the startup, they don't need to say they are kings in this space. They need to, when they're talking to somebody, that, hey, this is where we are, this is where we're at, this is what we're looking to achieve, and what skills do you have that will help us take the next step forward? Is it are you good in cold calling? Have you had experience in healthcare before, perhaps? You are excelled in email marketing. You were an excellent closer, perhaps, or what's your approach? So
yeah,
yeah.
and to even back in that a little bit and using a healthcare example, right? Like if I have 50, if I have 10 clinic practices, right, or if I have one health system that's signed on the dotted lines, right, and we're trying to, whether it's investor, whether it's focus, hey, I want to take us from one healthcare system, one hospital, to 10 hospitals this next year. Here's what we have, here's what we're going to do it. Great. And then if that person's only sold into health systems and has never had to create a contract or do that, and maybe they have success, maybe they're brilliant, that's maybe not going to do that, because they're going to be like, wait a minute, what do you mean I have to create the contract? What do you mean I have to, create all of this, create the pricing, right? I'm used to it seems so trivial, but like there's a difference between startup and that type of startup, right? And if they're okay with that and they understand that, that's great. But I would also argue it's going to be like night and day there, right? If you're, as a founder, if you're saying, I'm trying to go from 0 contracts in enterprise, let's just say, and then I want to get 50 health systems, what I would tell that sales executive to run, because you're almost running on a treadmill. No company is going to be able to close 50 health systems in a 12-month period when a sales cycle is 12 or 36 months, right? And so I think it's also too just getting granular on, revenue's great, but what are these microcosms from a job responsibility perspective? And sometimes too, it could just be workshopping, right? It's literally working with that founder, and maybe it's taking a little bit more of a time, but being able to do that in the hiring process on both parties, I think is going to be great, of being able to get that granular. And you still might make some misses, but I do think that sometimes folks overemphasize on salespeople. The crazy thing about salespeople is chances are, if you do a sales, if you're somewhat good at sales, you're probably going to do a good sales presentation, right? Because, chances are you're good with people, you can kind of, work the room. And then also too, if you chat with references, chances are you're not necessarily going to get a reference. One of the biggest is one of my mentors was like, well, where are the bad salespeople, right, Josh? Is because if you take a look at everybody's resume, if you look at any salesperson, chances are there's going to be ways that these salespeople are going to say they did that, Chances are nobody's going to be like, you know what, I misquote every single time and have that on the resume. So sometimes what you have to do is you have to kind of build a process, even at a startup, to kind of match make where you are, where you want to go, and hire people for that, not where you want to be in 5 years. And that's, to me, some of the biggest misses I've seen. And I have seen, if you miss on a sales hire, particularly as a sales leadership hire, I mean, it can set you back a year, 3 years. And once you kind of build the foundation of the house, you're kind of stuck with that, as I'm sure you've seen in some other different areas. So not to scare folks, but I do think that taking some time on the front end to be able to do some of that diligence. And the number one way to accelerate a startup in the health tech space is, quite honestly, with good engineering and product talent. I think number one. But then number 1B is with a great, sales and marketing team. And so sometimes it's not just throwing bodies out there, it's throwing the right bodies.
No, exactly. And I really have to screen properly and look at their background, and see what skills do they have and what they have accomplished, because this could make and break your startup, and you can spend a lot of money on this, or make a lot of money on this. So it's going to make and break. The name of the game is bringing in business and getting your product out there. So in this world of AI, and are you using any AI tools, perhaps, that nowadays there are automated, outreach software, or even sales rep? You can train people on your own voice. You can train AI on your own voice and take the initial phone calls, possibly, and that AI can be trained on all the company's data and all the sales scripts. And there will be an issue with making it sound natural, but there are some AI companies who are actually developing this type of software that you may automate just the initial outreach and initial possibly phone calls, or to just set up an appointment perhaps for down the line, to get a real human on board. But I mean, that's just starting off right now. But have you used, or have you tested out any software, any AI tools that may help improve the sales process?
Yeah, it's a good point. I'll give you some specific examples, right? So I think there's two trains of thoughts, right? There's AI, and then there's automation, but both of those also require the challenge with both those in a startup perspective is that requires that you have a fundamental process that can be scalable, right? And I think that that's the number one sometimes mistake is that if I throw AI and automation when I don't know what message is going to resonate, what our value prop is, or if I have 5 paying clients, I don't really know what our product is and how exactly it's going to help people. I might have a thesis of it. So sometimes having some of the AI can do more harm than good, because you're automating something that isn't going to resonate, right? But to me, the two most powerful usages of AI that I leverage when I think about selling into enterprise clients, there's tools like Gong. There's tools, at a cheaper version called, Fireflies AI. And these tools are really helpful, actually, not necessarily to get the meeting, but once I'm in meetings, is kind of an AI automated note taker. because if you can imagine, particularly early stage, you could be having lots of meetings, but chances are, particularly in the enterprise, like you could have I mean, I remember closing some deals where legitimately you have 30 to 50 meetings with the same organization, right? And what you're doing is that you're really helping go through and solving their big challenges at an enterprise level. So what you're actually doing is incrementally you're piecing together, here's what you said, here's how we solve it, and then doing that there. And so some of these AI note takings are really helpful for me where again, it's kind of a recorder in the background, but what it's doing is I'm able to focus solely on the conversation, be present, have active listening, but also too, what the AI is able to do is it's able to not just record the call, right, but pick out the key themes, pick out the notes, pick out the different next steps, not necessarily just to regurgitate that back to them. Where it becomes really powerful is 2, 3, 6 months down the road, we're kind of building that foundation of a success proposal of here's what you said, here's how we're solving it. And once you get to that point of showing them that, showing those leaders that, they can't really. It becomes not selling then, right? These tools are able to say, no, all I'm doing is I'm solving problems that you said that you had. Here's how we're doing it, and then here's the thread of how we're doing it. And so to me, some of those are powerful because it can allow me, there's some organizations, sales organizations or bigger companies that have like a sales engineer on there, a product specialist, and they have like 12 people on the call that's able to do that. Whereas I'm kind of showing the demo and then I'm also showing the slides and I'm answering the technical questions and doing all those. And so just being able to have that version of an AI can help me do all that without having to, jot down notes that I can't read or missing things or just doing a basic demo. So I really like that. And then there's Lavender AI. So I'm not a big proponent on automating the AI around kind of the throughput of increasing the amount of outreach, but there's a cool tool called Lavender AI that actually is able to analyze how you're constructing these emails, right? Based on what's going to get a good response rate, right? And it's super fascinating, basically saying you need to write at a 5th grade level. You're using too complex words. It's too lengthy. This is not going to be open. And what they do is their data set is actually all salespeople and really being able to say, are you personalizing enough? Right. Is this there? So I like those versions of it because it kind of is enhancing some of what I do, because sometimes if it just goes in the trash, and it still might go in the trash, but it can kind of, be a little bit more insight there. So those are the two main areas where I've seen the most, impact both on the front end, but also too within some of those conversations once you get in the door.
Right. No, definitely. So if you don't know what works, don't automate it. see what works first, and then maybe we see if we can automate it down the line. So
Yeah, and,
speaking
and,
of,
and I think
yeah,
if you're early stage sales leader, you have to have some version. Like there's times I block out my day to almost experiment. You almost have to enjoy the art of experiment from a sales perspective, right? Is that chances are what might have worked in December of 23 with the way technology is going might not work in there. And
yeah,
there's some things that I've pulled through from one startup to the next startup. There's kind of foundational things that if you don't do this, you're going to be in trouble. But it's kind of an odds of experimenting. But then also too, understanding you can't experiment all day. You can't just have a strategy, especially on a sales strategy. You can't have a strategy one week, switch it the next week. That's not going to be good for investors, for founders. So it's a little bit of art of experimenting with certain elements, but then also too having that foundational plan of this is the revenue, this is what we committed to investors, committed to organizations, and we feel that this is based on sound, but we can always enhance. But I think that's kind of the art, is a little bit of experimentation, but then also being able to execute and set expectations accordingly.
no, definitely. So speaking of AI, and Kintsugi is an AI voice biomarker detector software that detects depression and anxiety. How is this working, and how does this play into what you're doing right now, and how is this helping out with in the digital health space right now?
Yeah, so digital health is such a vast area, right? And so I'm super fortunate. I saw firsthand, kind of, from a background perspective, remote monitoring kind of before it was cool, and then now it's been really great to see like remote monitoring take off. There's wearables, but there's also areas where it's enhancing the ability to monitor patients' vital signs all the way up to acute care, hospital at home, and so around the AI space, and all of those are scaling. Mental health's always been a passion of mine. Being on the first part of my career, I worked within mental health, and then spent the last kind of 10 plus years in the physical health, if you want to call about it. But I think it's just an example, and you've been in healthcare to kind of see the different waves of right technology, but also right time. And it seems like mental health is mattering coming out of COVID, but just in general, folks are kind of connecting the dots. If you're not okay on a mental health perspective, it's actually going to affect your physical health, right? If your diabetes plus depression costs go up, treatment isn't going to work. There's workplace, mental health, employee mental health. It's all kind of hitting that precipice point. And so, from a technology perspective, it's kind of mirroring mental health mattering from a very population view, but also having where areas or AI that can kind of enhance workflows and enhance what already kind of exists in the infrastructure. And so that's where I think that the team at Kintsugi, Grace, our founder, a lot of the brilliant tech folks out in the Bay Area, they kind of built a technology that foundationally is kind of solving a challenge of there's no great way, and I'd love your perspective on internal medicine physician perspective. There's no kind of very great and scalable way to identify mental health, right? There's the PHQ-9. There's other questionnaires that are 20 plus years old and are just now kind of finally, even the last 10 years, I'm sure you've been a part of it, where it's like, hey, we need to ask these screenings and questionnaires because we need to know some of these patients who are depressed, right? And sometimes financially, it's like, well, we also are going to get reimbursed. But even if somebody's the best at asking these questionnaires, it's sometimes just not enough to be able to it's not a scalable way of doing some of this, of analyzing folks. And so what they kind of set out to do, Grace, the founder, and other parts of the team, is can we analyze and do some voice biomarkers? There's always been a connection between mental illness and voice, and this is a really powerful way of mirroring AI, where we're able to process and signal process, use AI, look at subtle patterns and pause and speech, to be able to correlate truly chronic mental health, in this case, depression or anxiety, using purely voice, right? And so it's been super fascinating, and I think it's kind of a mirror of the foundational science and then the power of AI to be able to analyze a voice and get an understanding of a patient's depression level in this example. And then further than that, as you know, in healthcare, it's like, well, great. Well, if a patient has to submit a voice sample, well, are they going to want to do that? And so I think that also from a technology perspective, it's really fascinating because it's an API-based solution. And so for those non-tech folks, what it can do is it can plug into existing clinical workflows to basically allow a very scalable way of capturing what already exists and conversations that exist to either start the conversation, identify patients who are going to slip through the cracks, or be able to kind of monitor at scale folks who maybe need help, who maybe need to be risk stratified into different areas. And so we're really there's nobody doing this at a exponential level. This is just the groundbreaking start of this technology. Luckily, Kintsugi is kind of one of the leaders there. There's not that many people doing it specifically for depression or anxiety, but as I'm sure you've seen, there's voice scribes, like there's Amazon Alexa. The voice concept is not only becoming more and more big in the healthcare space, but I think it's also widely adopted in everyday lives, right? And so I think it's really has the promise to be able to kind of unlock some of this.
Yeah, definitely. So now we're developing newer tools to diagnose our older medical problems. Just to step back a little bit, for example, if I remember this correctly, I'm not into surgery much, but appendicitis. Back in the day we had Avogadro score by which we were looking at lab values and things like that, and not actually looking at imaging studies as much. But then down the line, we were largely focusing on imaging studies, as possibly, the person comes to the ER, they get a CAT scan, and things are a lot simpler. So tools are being improved. And so, from the mental health standpoint, you look at the patient, you look at the person's appearance, and of course, voice matters. And these are just all tools that down the line will be added to our diagnostic criteria. And it could be mental ailments, it could be physical ailments, it could be surgical needs and dementia and whatnot. So uh, our criteria for diagnosing a medical problem or a mental problem 10 years ago would have been good for 10 years ago earlier, right? But now we're getting newer tools to diagnose our medical or mental issues. So software or programs or approaches such as this are just coming into the mix about how we can use this or integrate this in making our diagnosis better, quicker, faster, and not having those misdiagnoses that have been possibly the way of the past, and get to a conclusion and start a treatment and identify what you need to do earlier than what you would have done with your routine approach or standard of care that was for the past. Now, newer standards of cares are being developed, uh, and this is just part of the picture.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, right? And I think there's a long way to go. I'm really excited about being a part of, the team, the process. Many clinicians, as you said, a lot is going to be on the forefront. I think specific to some of the conversations that we have, right, is number one, patient consent is a key component of this, right? When we work with our partners or just in general, right, that's kind of a table stakes of consenting to this, but to your point, the whole idea behind this technology is it is kind of infinitely scalable, right? Of being able to embed this into those different decision trees and workflows that already exist, right? Virtual care being an example, the call center an example, with the idea of these are patients that probably would have never been asked some of these questionnaires or thought, they're thinking about their diabetes or their blood pressure, but it could be something that they do have an underlying issue with depression. And so sometimes it's just surfacing it, not to replace the doctor's judgment, even screenings that exist today. It's really to unlock and enhance in real time, right? That's some of the biggest advantage of it is while you're on with a doctor's office visit, how do you create much more value with the conversations that exist today, right? So our analysis can kind of do that while we're having a virtual visit as we were doing right now. And then that doctor could ask some of those questionnaires. They could triage and understand patients that need low or moderate might need different treatment interventions than moderate or severe, right? There could be organizations we're working with where it's much more longitudinal tracking. They already actually maybe know that the patient is depressed or anxious, but when they go and they kind of deliver therapy, or they deliver different therapeutics all the way from digital up to telepsychiatry, wouldn't it be great to workflow wise, as you know, you couldn't ask some of those questionnaires every single time a patient had therapy because otherwise nobody would do therapy, right? And so what if though we do need measurement based care, we need to know things that work or not work. It's not as black and white around mental health. And so these are all the really exciting areas that I think it's early stage, but being able to make it frictionless from a patient perspective. And then as we talked about way back when, frictionless, if these conversations are already existing, how do we make technology that kind of embeds in the background of what it currently exists? And so I do think even outside of what we do now, technologies that flow into what already exists, whether that's within Epic, within telehealth, within there, to enhance the doctors, I'm really bullish on because I think that those are going to be table stakes because gone are the days you can't ask an organization to uproot their EMR. You can't ask for organizations to sign into a different platform or panel, and that might work for a subset of populations, but that's not scalable department wise, enterprise wide. And so I'm really excited about working with the organizations, particularly in mental health, where it's kind of a niche area, but an area that has been proven, if left unaddressed, it's not going to be great for anyone, even if you're kind of focusing on the physical health.
No, absolutely. And as you know, I believe last year there were more people dying of suicide than car accidents, and that is just alarming. And that just plays with anxiety and depression. And people get admitted to the hospital all the time. They're cutting themselves or trying different means of hurting themselves, and they definitely need to be followed up longitudinally. and there has to be a mechanism, and we can use all of these newer tools that are coming into that we're seeing right now, and Kent Suji being a prime example, at least for this pandemic epidemic of depression, anxiety, that has been leading to suicide, and drug overdoses. All of these are combined, and they all fall into the same spectrum. So excited that this is something that you have taken up for yourself, and would love to see where this is going. And we can talk about this in the future as well. Um, so just a few, just to step back a little bit more from the startup perspective. And I think we touched a little bit upon the topic of venture capitalists for startups. From a sales perspective, um, maybe in bullet points, what are VCs looking for in a startup before they plan on funding a startup, a digital health startup?
Yeah, so I think everybody has their different criteria, as I'm sure you know, and just chatting with founders. I've been in it in a whirlwind, call it of even the last 8 to 10 years. It's just been a crazy environment of what is digital health to lots of funding, lots of ideas, and a little bit of an overcorrection. I've been a part of hyper growth companies that have raised traditional money on money, and then now it seems like it's definitely one of the biggest challenges when I chat with founders is to get funding at all, right? And so sometimes there's probably good ideas, and so where sales intersects with that is you have to have traction. So I think some of the key metrics that I've seen in healthcare, what's unique is revenue is always going to be a key metric. So if you're able to create revenue with whatever product you have, then that's going to be an amazing metric. But the challenge is, as you know, in healthcare, is it's not the only metric, right? And so I think some of the other metrics to think about is is kind of the logos that you have, right? And not using that as the only metric, but there's a difference between if you have signed SOW and contract from the Mayo Clinic in Northwell, then other small regional hospitals, right? That's sometimes going to matter, and it's going to matter from a validity and an outcome perspective, and kind of help you get from those two maybe to the others. So that's number one. A lot of the metrics are going to always involve utilization. So figure out what your utilization is. Is it number of patients? Is it number of providers? Is it number of, if you're in the, selling something in healthcare, is it the number of transactions? Getting really good at understanding how you're going to generate the revenue, and then what are those metrics that are going to matter. The time to close a deal, the average deal size, right? So if you have something that you say, hey, you know what, we can do this, we can solve this problem, it's $20,000, and then you can go out and get 100 of those $20,000 deals. You've obviously proven some of that, and it's not a massive deal size, but that's going to affect how VCs are able to do that. And so some of those are metrics, and I think being able to be really, really crystal clear on those metrics becomes almost table stakes at this point of being able to raise money. But then also too, understanding that there's ways to get your technology into the hands of those that doesn't require the VC money. Hopefully you're going to VC and getting that because of two reasons, right? Number one, you want to obviously expand the sales and marketing and hire some of those folks, or sometimes too, if you have a really great product and you have a fit, sometimes it's also being able to convince them that you need some of the the R&D, that tech talent, the engineering talent, to be able to hire some of those because you're solving some of those challenges.
No, exactly. All right. So, Josh, it was a pleasure having you here, and maybe we can connect in the future and see about the progress of your mental health startup.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. It's been fantastic to follow you, and congrats on all the success on the podcast. And yeah, if anyone ever wants to connect with me, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, Josh Pappas on LinkedIn, or feel free to send me a note. I really do enjoy working with founders of digital health companies. I enjoy working with folks that are trying to enter or break into the digital health on the sales side. And the way I've seen the healthcare world, it's a nice small circle. So usually I love to, grab even 15, 20 minutes virtual coffee with no expectations other than just to learn about interesting people doing interesting things in or outside of healthcare. So thanks for having me on.
All right. Thank you so much, Josh. I'd love to talk to you later. Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Thanks.
I appreciate you as a valuable viewer, and thanks for watching till the very end. If you liked this, check out this podcast. I know you will love it. You can also check for more interesting links in the description. I'm Dr. Umer Khan. Looking forward to seeing you again. Thank you.